am Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest. He's the author of his TV novels, no other than Mr. Kalimaxos.
How are you?
I'm good, Mr. Kelly, and welcome back.
Thank you very much.
So last episode we talked about your second book or your first book, if I'm not mistaken.
It was one of my earlier works, The Stories of Jane.
Yes, Jane Diary. So how many books are there or series?
On Jane's books, there's 8 books in the series.
Yes, can we do a recap?
Um, Jane's Diaries is a book about a fictional man who he's retired and he finds his wife's diaries after she's passed away. And in the diaries, she basically details mostly um, all her indiscretions and things that she did, the life she had on the side that he never knew. So she had affairs, um, her and some inner thoughts about life, her marriage, about him, about her kids, about all kinds of stuff that she never shared with him exactly. Pretty much sort of like in real life where we live our life, we marry somebody, but we never share with them every single thought. Well, he finds those books and they're very eye-opening, and as he goes through them, he realizes that the wife that he thought he knew was totally different. She was a totally different person. And that's the general premise of the books. That's how it starts, with him finding the diaries and starts reading them. And he examines a life with her through those books. The last book ends the week that we had lockdown in March of 2020, and but it starts as early as in the diaries as the late 60s when Jane was a young girl. So
Yes, sounds interesting, Mr. Kelly. What book we gonna talk about today?
today we're going to talk about a series that I began writing about 2 years ago, um, and eventually, after several versions, it ended up on Amazon, and it's in 6 parts. As a matter of fact, the last part, part 6, was published just recently, about 10 days ago or somewhere there. Um, and it's pretty much I could write more in the story, but those 6 parts kind of like are the beginning, the middle, and the end of the. Let's put it this way: that part of the story, like Winston Churchill used to say, "This is not the beginning, this is not the end, but this is the end of the beginning." Well, if you look at those 6 books, they're a snapshot in these people's lives from one point to another point, and um, the um, the story is um, interesting in that it's a combination of erotica tropes and in-depth description of how these people, especially the husband and wife in the story, um, deal with life and their issues and problems. The story is told from the point of view of the wife, first person.
Yes,
So
my husband's boss have 6 series, right? So how did you connected each other?
whole premise of the book begins really in book one. I mean, that's where everything starts, and there's a ball starts rolling down the hill from there, that culminates in book six. But if we go through a little bit of the premise and the story of number one, that sets up everything else that happens, and we don't have to go there, but let the readers find out themselves. But this is the basic premise of the story. The year is early 2009, when we had a recession, worldwide, not just in the United States. And there is this couple, uh, Allison and um, Jace, and she, right before this happened, she didn't know that there was going to be a collapse or whatever. She was a little lax at her job, not showing up on time, being early, or this or that, and she ended up getting fired. So they only have her husband's job, where he works, and things are not going well with the economy, and the money that they have is not enough, and they start getting behind on their bills. And they live in when they used to have two incomes, they bought a house in a nice neighborhood, nice schools. They have two little kids, and things were a certain way, and all of a sudden they're beginning to realize, when they do the math, that things are not going to be well for them if they don't do something. And around that time is when, at the beginning of the years, they have a like a holiday party, New Year's holiday combined thing, at his job, at Jace's job. And at that party, she meets the main character, the husband's boss, David, um, and his wife, who's there at the party. And David and Allison hit it off. They're dancing and they're talking, and it's kind of clear to Jace that his boss likes his wife. But everything is above board. All they did was dance, and the boss's wife, Vera, is upset at him, and she's been drinking a little bit. So the boss asks the husband to Jace to drive her home, because he can't leave the party and all the guests. So he takes the wife home. He drives her home, and then the wife is left alone with the boss, and they do more talking and more dancing, and she realizes that the man is really attractive. She really likes him. um, Nothing up until this moment, there's nothing uncommon for most people. How many of us have, even though we're married, we go somewhere in a situation like that, and we meet somebody that we may find attractive, but we don't exactly think that anything's going to come of it. Well, eventually her husband returns from taking the drunk wife home, the boss's wife home, and eventually they go home. And he tells her in the next few days what happened when he took the wife home. That was unhappy. She blurted out that she was unhappy, that they were having problems. She and her husband, the boss, were having problems, and he says, she told me things that I didn't know, that but they're an opportunity. He sees a certain opportunity for them to use that information that he gathered, that his boss and his wife are having marital problems, that she's cut him off, she's not um, um, giving him sex. Part of it is because he's kind of well endowed, and he has a tendency of hurting her when they have sex. And she pretty much tells him to cut it out and be more gentle because she can't handle it. And he won't. He's kind of rude about it with her because they're arguing all the time. And so she basically cuts him off. So the guy hasn't had a woman in a while. And
Wow.
yeah, so Jace, the Allison's husband, and her have these conversations where they concoct the plan where there's a promotion coming up at the company, a big promotion that, and that if Jace gets it, they would be making more than enough money to make up for her lost salary. And because the economy is bad, she can't find work anywhere.
Yes.
So, so what the plan is that they're going to make a proposal to David where Jace gets the job and Allison, the wife, is the collateral. She will basically be offered up to be the boss's mistress in return for that job. So theoretically, you could say that Allison got a job.
Definitely. So, my husband's boss, what do you think for all those 6 series or 6 books? What is the best highlight?
Well, there's two parts that are highlights. One is the beginning, how this whole deal ends up going down. And it goes down pretty quickly in chapter one. I mean, they meet, the husband and wife over the next couple of months concoct everything, and then it culminates with um, her going to a hotel with him. I mean, there's a moment where the husband literally they meet him at a bar, and they pitched the idea to him that, we want the promotion and my wife is going to be the collateral. And he basically tells him, it's now or never. There's a hotel across the street. You're either there in 30 minutes or the job doesn't go to you and you're out of luck. So the husband drops her off, and the boss literally tells them, okay, now it's time for you to leave, and I'll bring her back to you when I'm done. Something that I don't care how conniving any man can be, and woman, but that is a shocking moment as to how they feel about these things. So that's the first part. The second part that is the big highlight is later on in the story when the wife finds out, Vera, the boss's wife, about what's been going on. And at the risk of spoiling the story, I'm going to leave it at that.
Yes. Hang on there, people. You need to read My Husband's Boss.
It is very erotic. I'm going to say this right off the bat. This story is full of steamy sex.
Yes. So once you read it, it just like you have impulsed very erotic.
Yeah, I mean
Spoiler
it.
alert.
Yes, it is. The sex is very descriptive, but it's not just about sex. I mean, it's not just, you don't open a page, and that's one of the things about my books. They're not, just sex. I mean, they have sex in them, but they're a story about life. And in this book, as you see the chapters, the main characters, uh, the 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 theme that is in this book and in some of my other books is that couples who do stuff like this, they don't survive if they are doing it solo. If one of them is doing something and the other one is not. I mean, I could have written a story where the wife on her own goes and does this, and the husband doesn't know, and You get that shock value, and it's a trope story, but it's a story where it's just her. The husband is not involved. She's not doing it with him. In this case, these two are in it together from the beginning. And the one thing that you see in the story from beginning until the end is how they interact with one another, how they discuss it, how they they go through, in book two, they go through a point where the husband, the shock of what has happened hits him. Oh my God, I just gave my wife to someone else for money.
Yes, definitely. So, if you have a second choice of the title of your novel, which one? Or do you have a second option for the title?
Oh, you mean to change the title to make it to something else? Um,
Yes.
I from the beginning, I never even thought that it would be anything but husband's boss. Um, but, I could have called it, like the deal or something like that, or another indecent proposal, which is like one of the subtitles of my work. But I thought that what encompassed this whole deal for her, the main character, was that she was stepping out with her husband's boss. And many places in the story, I don't call him by his name. There's times that she says, I was with David, I did this with David, but a lot of times it's, I did this with my husband's boss. The reader, what she's doing, and there's the power dynamic. See, this is, you know sometimes a story can be a collection of tropes. I mean, I normally find pure tropes in stories to be a little too simplistic, too dimensional. It's, if you just do a trope and that's it, for me, it doesn't work. I need to have a little bit more. And for me, the more is the interaction between these people, the thinking that goes, like how she and her husband are. There's a moment later on in the story where one of the other characters passes judgment on them, and she says, "For crying out loud, you two discuss everything. You probably discuss private things, personal private things about going to the bathroom together." And the main character is kind of like taken aback, because in her mind, none of what she and her husband has done would have happened. Their marriage wouldn't have survived it if they were not in tune with one another, and if they weren't honest with one another about what was going on. I mean, there's some things that she has to tell him that are very stark, like the fact that when she has to tell him that she actually likes having sex with his boss. And she, that I mean, she could have lied to him and say, "Oh honey, I'm just putting up with it, it's not really that good."
Yes, definitely. So, my husband's boss, if you want to revise it, which part of the book you want to revise?
If I wanted to revise it,
Yes.
no, well, I could say nothing. But there is one part that one of the readers told me, and it's a detail thing. There's one character in the story, their babysitter, and I brought her into the story, but on the last chapter, I didn't really talk about her a lot, just a little bit. And the reason why was because I was thinking that if I wrote chapter 7, that's where she would be in. And this gentleman, he told me that he loved the book, but he wished that this character had been more into book number number 6. And I think that maybe had I had like an extra segment or with her in it, that might have had a little bit more continuity. But other than that, I mean, the main part of the story is told in these 6 chapters. And there's in a story, that character was like a side character. um but the main part of the story is what happens, the the deal that they made with this man, maintain, how they managed to go through the deal and handle it themselves, and then what happens later on that culminates in, there's some drama as to what happens with the deal down the road, because there's also the man's wife involved, and she's kind of lurking in the background. And I don't want to spoil it by saying what happens with her, but th- take my word for it, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end to the story, and it's pretty much there. Everything I needed, the points, when you're doing an outline on your story, I hit them all. So maybe aside the side character aspect, but other than that, it has, when somebody reads it, they're they're going to get the full story. They're not going to be left hanging.
Sounds interesting, Mr. Kelly. So before we go on, I want to shout out to the people listening in the United States, especially in the state of Ohio. I have 33 places in Ohio listening to my podcast. Number one, in Cincinnati, I got 18%, Columbus, 17%, Akron at 13%, Cleveland at 7%, Toledo at 14%, and the rest are Dayton, Westlake, Medina, Sydney, Lancaster, Beechwood, North Bend, Canton, Sardinia. Oh, you have Sardinia in Ohio. St. Mary's, Youngstown, Miamisburg, Chesterland, Sandusky, Findlay, Avon, Broadview Heights, Barberton, Westerville, Sanesville, Belleville, Unrichville, Wapakoneta. Oh, Pinesville, North Canton, Cleveland Heights, East Liverpool, Fairfield, and the last but not the least, Dublin. Thank you for supporting this podcast, because this podcast is created to empower writers all over the world, like Mr. Kalimaxos. So, Mr. Kali, what are your preparation in writing all your steamy novels?
The main Whenever I write one of my stories, there's a overriding theme, that I get an idea in my head, and I over the years, I mean, you're in life, you live life. You don't need to read steamy novels to know that there's a certain, um, like looking at this story, the concept of the boss and the power dynamic between a boss and employees, and the possibility of sexual aspect being involved. Where I worked, I had a boss who he lost his position as CEO because of an affair he had with one of the women there. So it's not like it doesn't happen. I mean, all you have to do is look at the news from time to time, and you see that things like that do happen. And there was a recent case where a woman army officer lost her position because of her indiscretions with some of her subordinates. Apparently, she was putting her hands where they did not belong. So, that's just like a general, thing where you you have a general idea of something, and then you say, some to certain ideas, that there's a certain synchronicity sometimes in the thought process of writing a book. And I think that goes whether it's an erotic book or non-erotic. um, a certain confluence of ideas all kind of come together in the mind of the writer. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, and a little bit of something else. I mean, I lived through the time period that I'm talking about. I remember being at work, and they got rid of a whole bunch of people and kept some of us. And I remember the stress of being in that situation. So the 2009 recession to me was something that I went through. And on a business setting, so that I remember what it was like, and got it enough to do what what that what they did in the story. But I got it, and that together with other things came together, and that story came about. And that's pretty much, with every story I've written so far. There's a certain there's some commonalities in some of them, and this is one aspect of sexuality in this book that is prevalent in modern erotica these days. The concept of wife sharing, that didn't used to be real big when I remember being exposed to it when I was younger. um, but it has gone to another level these days in erotica and in apparent real life. I just saw a recent article on the Daily Mail about it, and I was surprised that the percentage was in double digits in marriages of people who do that. And so the and that aspect of it, the emotional, the personal, is what I try to show in this book and some of the other books that I have written on that topic. Not all of them are that way, but my husband's boss and two other series involve that concept. Actually, three. There's four different book series that I've written where, in one way or another, that aspect of sexuality is thrown in, and it is psychologically very very difficult, obviously, for people to deal with. It's not something that people normally do. It's not something you're supposed to do. There's that shock that people, whenever they hear of it, let alone do it, go through. There's like, oh my God, wife sharing. You're sharing your wife. Ooh, you know, how could you do such a thing?
Yeah,
Well, in
it's
go
like a
ahead.
taboo.
There have been cases recorded in history, where it's mentioned, that it has taken place.
Yes.
Now, whether some people want to, give validity to it or whatever, but bottom line is that it's not something totally new, and the whole concept is, there's many aspects. I mean, like, not everybody does it the same way and for the same reasons. In this story, in My Husband's Boss, it all came about for economic gain. I mean, this is, the husband had and the wife had discussed doing something like that. And when she tells him about her past with a previous boyfriend, she tells him about an event where she tried something like that, and it didn't go well. Her boyfriend allowed it, and it went belly up on them, and she ended up losing that boyfriend because of that. Um, And the reality is that it's one of those things. It's a psychosexual situation where the mind is challenged. It's like when in marriage, and this is one of the things that is prevalent in my books, is you see a lot of stories about married people. There's a tendency for some people to think that fun and games are like basically when you're single and then you get married and all you have sex is just with you and your wife, and of course you have less than you used to because for whatever reasons, which could take another program to talk about. But that that's the general common notion of marital of our life and sex, that we have most of it, the fun part, the person to having multiple partners before we're married, and then it's just one, and you're my one and only, and that's how it is, and that's how life should be. And as I was telling you last on the last episode, there's basically three different ways in marriage if it's not working. One is you tough it out and you just do stick with your one partner. Two, you leave that partner and you look for another one. And three is you stay married, but you include other people in your sex life. Now, in the book of Jane decided to be a cheater, and she was cheating on her husband for her entire life, right up until you know uh, she died, and as we know in her diaries, and of course that was her. She did the third way option for a woman, where she decides on her own to do what she did. Other people do other things. You have people who are swingers, who basically um, have other partners, and both of them have other partners. They swap with other couples, and then you have couples like the one here in this story, and some of the other wife sharing stories, where basically the wife is the main sexual person in the family. She's the one who's having sex with other people. Husband is not. And that is the concept of what has now become, it's an old word uh, called cuckolding. Where somebody else, in the traditional manner, basically the husband in the Jane story, he was cuckolded by his wife, by her cheating. That was the traditional way of looking at it. The definition, I think, if you look in dictionaries, it comes from basically from the cuckoo bird, who leaves its eggs in another, yeah, in another nest, so that the male doesn't know that that baby is not his. It, you know, so
Yes.
that's where the concept of the cuckolding came from. And but modern cuckolding is basically wife sharing, because unlike the cuckolding of old, where basically the wife goes and cheats and maybe gets pregnant by another man, in this case it is the husband who approves and may even be the instigator in this. It's a totally different lifestyle than most people. It's definitely taboo. I mean, the concept that a husband approves of this and even wants to watch. I mean, that it's deep. This is a deep kink, a deep sexual. Some people would say that it's a deviancy. I try not to pass judgments with these things, because uh, in my opinion, everybody has a little bit of something weird about their sexuality, and if we were all to put it out and say what ours is, everybody's carrying with them something that is strange. So I try not to be judgmental in my stories. I don't. Um, I am a little judgmental on infidelity.
Oh,
Um,
okay. So, Mr. Kelly, how did you enhance your writing in steamy novels?
I am privileged that when I was young, before I got married, I lived a very good life and full of um, sexual experimentation and stuff that a lot of people don't do. I was, I was living in New York at the time, and I was interested in the topic, and the, part of it is because I'm a person whose sexuality to me was a big thing. And here's the thing, that there's some people who are sexual people, and then there's people who are not. I mean, there's some people who basically say, look, as far as I'm concerned, it's good for procreation, that's it.
Yes.
Or and then you got some people who are like on the total far end, where they're like, I don't want any. I mean, I don't get those people, but I know they exist. Okay, they're asexuals, and I dealt with that in one of my books, where the wife was married to a man who basically only did it for procreation, nothing else. In the book, My Decision. But there's others on the total opposite end. I mean, when I was young, when I was a teenager, came, I got the knowledge that as you're growing up, you see the adults in your family, and I found out that one of my aunts was extremely sexual, to the point that my uncle couldn't provide all that she needed, and he knew that she was stepping out on him. He was in shipping. He worked on ships, so he would be away for a long time. And married to a woman like that, he knew from the start that there was no way that the woman is gonna. I mean, he'd be gone for months, and there was no way that she was gonna go without. She couldn't go without for a day, let alone, a week or a month, let alone months. So now some women can handle it. They rough it out, they get toys or whatever, but she couldn't. And he knew, and he allowed it. And when I found this out, I was like 15, 16 years old. I mean, I had heard some things, but I didn't know, that there were people that much into sex. And the thing is that as I was growing up, I realized that, I thought that it was because I was a young teenage boy that, sex was an important aspect of my life. But eventually, I came to realize that it was a big part of my life. That I was one of those people in the spectrum on the side of, I want it and like it a lot. So, and um, I experimented. I went out with as many girls as possible. I did girls my age. I did women older than me. And at a time, me and my first significant other got involved with a group of swingers in New York. And
Okay.
and that's where I learned a lot about sexuality that you don't pick up in normal relationships. I learned about, wife sharing. I learned about, kinks and ideas and thinking that a lot of people like don't do. Eventually, my aunt explained to me her relationship with my uncle, and how he put up with it and all that. And I can say that he was probably the first guy that I knew who actually got off on knowing that his wife was doing other men. And this was many years ago, when I was like 16. So anyway, but all those experiences taught me a lot about sex and about what people do. And not just that, they taught me about, like, in talking to some of these people. I think I've told you, I'm a very big student of the human experience, the the why do people do what they do. You know, you got some of these stories that people write, or where they just throw out, oh my God, I went home and I found my wife cheating on me, and all this, and not once in the story do we ever get her side and how she went from good wife to what she's doing. I'm like, in my mind, in any story, whenever I see, whether I'm watching a TV show or reading a detective novel, or watching a movie or anything, I need story. I and the story and the characters have to make sense. So I ask, like, what do these people do what they do? What's the point? What is the reason? What drove them to go from this to that? And what are they thinking while they're doing it? How do they interact with one another? What do they say to one another? You know, those are the things that always intrigue me, and I found that there's there's not enough of that. So if you read my books, the story, there is a lot of conversation between these people. There's the interaction as to why something is happening, and there's in this book, My Husband's Boss, you're basically hearing her side of it, because she's the main character. I mean, let's face it. Between there's these she's there's the husband, there's the boss, and then there's her, and she is the linchpin between them. So you're hearing her side when she's with the boss, and you're hearing her side when she's with the husband. And she's like the connection between all of them. Um, but you hear the thoughts of these people, the why do they do what they do. And I can't tell you how many times my wife and I have been watching a movie or a TV show, and we turn and look at each other and go, bad writing.
Definitely.
Yeah, because it doesn't mash. It doesn't. The characters are not, they're not responding realistically, or they're not speaking to each other realistically.
Yes.
And that's the thing. And it doesn't have to be erotica. I mean, but here's the thing. You were asking me about preparation for doing steamy scenes, because when I was young, I was exposed to all that stuff, and I learned about these things, is why I can write some of this stuff. And when you read the steamy part, it sounds realistic. It's sort of like reading a detective story written by a policeman, or a detective story written by a doctor. The policeman is going to know the detective business in ways a doctor never can. And the same thing with a medical story, a story about medical stuff in a hospital. A doctor can. I mean, you're familiar with the series MASH. Am I correct? From the old days on TV, the Korean War hospital, mobile surgical hospital. The concept was written and created by a guy who had been a doctor at one of those hospitals. And so he knew what he was talking about. And he came off real because he knew. Okay. It's like, if I would have written it, what would I bring to the table? I don't know much about medicine. I mean, so, and the same thing with writing sexual books. If you take somebody who basically has had one partner in their life, um, if you have a person who has limited experience, they're not going to be able to give you an idea of what's going on in the story. So that that's why a lot of writers end up spending a lot of time doing research on topics that they don't know anything about. I mean,
Yes.
they an enormous amount of research. You talk to some of these people and they say, "Oh my God, Tom Clancy used to do these techno thrillers, and he had never been in the military.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
but the guy absorbed books about the military and technology and stuff to an unbelievable level. But he had to do the research to get there. Um, well, somebody who's worked in that field brings it with them. I mean, if
Yes.
you so that's my point. That's what, and it pertains to not just sexuality but anything else in writing. If you're writing something that you've experienced, um, you're
It,
more likely to come off believable in your story.
it comes naturally, as they said.
Right. I
Before we go, Mr. Kelly, I just want to invite you to listen to my other podcast, Food 101, on our third season with Chef Alessandro, one of the executive chef in one of the five-star hotel in downtown Toronto. So please do listen. Food 101. Plus one more. Please do listen for my one more podcast, Geography 101. It's all about the places that I visited from Europe, Caribbean, North America, South America, Russia, and a lot more. So please do listen. Geography 101. Mr. Kali, can you please invite our listeners to buy all your books?
um, my books are different. They're not your run of the mill. And I'm sure you've heard this from many writers, but I would like you to give a different mindset when you're reading my books. Um, they represent sexuality amongst married people as a common occurrence, an important occurrence, and it's done in a totally different manner. You get what they do, which is different and sometimes taboo, but also that you hear their thoughts, their beliefs, their interaction with one another, with other characters, and sometimes it's painful to hear the things that they have to say to one another and what they hear from one another. But that's the reality of life, and you're not just going to get a purely erotic story or purely romantic story or something to that or oh my god, my marriage is not doing well story. You're getting the whole treatment, and it is done in a refreshing and different way, where the couples actually communicate with one another and stay together mostly. So if you want to read something about modern marriage in a different way, in an honest way, I think you should give my books a try. You will definitely be entertained and intrigued by the characters and by the stories.
And learn a lot, people, because it's based on the experience of Mr. Kelly, especially the steamy scenes. Oh, I love it. Right, Mr. Kelly?
Yes, yes. That was my whole intention when to tell you the truth, when I wrote him. If you got a minute, I mean, I had a conversation with one of my coworkers some years ago, and he made me realize how clueless this man, who was in his early 40s, was about sexuality, about his own life, about himself, let alone his wife. They were having some problems and all that, and I listened like I like to do, and uh, I was shocked at how little he understood or knew about what people are supposed to do. He had been raised to not think about these things, and there was nowhere for him to read him. And he told me, he says, "Well, I've read some porn stories and all that. And and I said to him, well, what did you read? And he told me about one that kind of like made him think a little bit. And it was so simplistic and so like the characters were not alive and all that. And I was at that point that I said to myself, you know what? I think people need a little more than just that. They need a little bit more than just as it's called in the erotica world, a stroke story, where you basically pick up the book and all you get is the mechanics of who did what where. Very little background, very little setup. The characters are practically unknown to you. Okay, all you know is that there's a wife, there's a husband, there's a the guy or whatever, or somebody, but very little, and it's just that. Well, other than maybe getting some mechanical lessons, you're not going to get any thinking behind it. That this is what I was telling him. I said to him, let me tell you something. If you experiment in some of these things that you're thinking about, um, there's consequences. Your life is not going to be the same. Your marriage is not going to be the same. And I, he's sitting there looking at me, and I was 5 years younger than him, and I might as well have been talking to a teenager just about to go out in life. This man was a boss of a department. He had a master's degree. An MBA. I mean, he had it all going on in one aspect of his life. But when he came to his sex life, between him and his wife, and him in general, his own personal life, clueless.
He's
And
innocent in everything.
yeah, so in my mind, and he wasn't the first one. I got to tell you something. I've run into so many people because, unfortunately, in our life, sexuality is something that we don't talk about. It's John Lennon one time said, "It's funny, we have to hide to make love, but we have movies about killing people um, that are getting Oscars."
Yes.
And yeah, and I mean, his point was very simple right then and there. I mean, a simple act of making love, which is like everybody does it, and it's nobody dies from it. Children are born of it. It's so so we've made it into something bad and dirty, or we hide it. It's taboo. It's put it in the cloud. Don't talk about it. No, 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 no. Well, the reality is that there's a lot of problems in the world because we have grown adults that never
Yes.
got an education or an exposure to any of it. Now, I'm not saying that everybody should go out and do all this stuff. Take my word for it. A lot of this stuff, the sexual world has a lot of things in it, and not everything is for everybody. I mean, the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre went to a famous whorehouse in Paris one time that was known for you could do there anything you wanted to do. And he came out that weekend, and one of his friends said to him, "So, John, how did it go?" He said, "Oh, unbelievable." And the guy said to him, "You going back again?" And he said his response was, "Once curious, twice a pervert." So there's things now I know that and I wonder if maybe Jean-Paul Sartre didn't embellish that story to make it the way it is, especially knowing how he was doing practically anything under the sun. He was one of those type of people. I bet you he went back to that whorehouse a lot, but but
Not,
but the point is that not everything is for everybody. So the best thing to do is to be educated and make choices about what's good for you and what is not good for you. That's my view, and I've tried in my books to give people a window into some things. I don't touch on everything, but I touch on enough and I'm still not done writing. So there's some more things I want to write, and basically show that, how it works, and how it affects the people that do it. That these people, and the people, I want them to be three-dimensional, colorful people that people can read and identify with and say, oh my God, what was she thinking? Or I understand what he was thinking, and all that. That's how stories need to be presented, so that they're they come alive for the reader, to not just live through and be entertained, but also to learn something from it.
Very well said, Mr. Kelly. Again, Mr. Kelly, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Pleasure to be here.
And once again, let's support Mr. Kelly because all his book is one of a kind and based on his experience. More to come, people. See you soon.